On Christmas Eve, my daughter-in-law handed me a card. Roses are red. Violets are blue. We don't want a sick grandma. Christmas is not for you. Everyone laughed. Even my son. Even the children. I smiled. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. But the next morning, I vanished. And they had no idea what I took with me. My name is Myrtle Patterson. I'm 65 years old. Widowed. Retired nurse. Diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's 6 months ago. I raised my son David alone. Sent him to college. Supported him through 3 failed businesses. Helped him buy his house. I was the kind of mother who put everyone else first. And on Christmas Eve, I realized that nobody in that house saw me as anything more than a burden. What they didn't know was that I had power. Not loud power. Not the kind you throw in someone's face. But the quiet, legal kind. The kind written in wills. Trusts. Bank accounts. And automatic payments. Before I tell you how I rewrote my life and turned their world upside down, please like this video, subscribe if you're new, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the people you loved most? I read every word you write. Now, let me take you back to that night. Christmas Eve. The tree was glowing in the corner. Glittering ornaments I had collected over decades now, hanging in David's perfect suburban home. Dinner was still warm on the kitchen counter. I had cooked it myself. Of course. Despite Zuri's whispered warning that my hands might contaminate something, I'd been ignoring the comments. The sighs. The polite distance. But nothing could have prepared me for that card. Zuri had insisted I read it aloud. Her sister giggled beside her. David leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting with something I hadn't seen before. The kids snickered, though Emma looked confused. I read the poem once. Then twice. The words cut deeper the second time. I looked around the room, waiting, hoping for someone to say, "That's not funny. That's too far." "Mom, I'm sorry." But no one said anything. They just laughed. As if I were a bad joke they'd finally gotten tired of pretending to enjoy. I had given my whole life to this family. David was 12 when his father left. I worked night shifts, paid his tuition. When he couldn't get a mortgage, I gave him the down payment. I'd even been quietly paying the bills he didn't realize were mine. The mortgage. Me. Emma's school tuition. Me. Health insurance. Me. Their second home in Vermont. Still me. They thought I was just a sick, fragile old woman. What they didn't realize was, they had been living in a house I paid for. I stood up from the table. My legs shook, either from my Parkinson's or my shock. "I need some air," I said. No one followed me. No one asked if I was okay. As I stepped out onto the porch, the cold hit my skin like needles. But it was nothing compared to what I felt inside. In my hand, I still clutched the card. Red and green glitter stuck to my palm like blood. Through the glass, I could see them laughing again. Zuri holding up her new jewelry. David sipping wine. The children unwrapping gifts. Not a single person looking toward the door. I wasn't family to them anymore. I was a problem. An inconvenience. And in that moment, I made the most important decision of my life. The next morning, before sunrise, I began preparing for my escape. Not just from their house, but from the role they had forced me into for decades. I wasn't leaving quietly, and I wasn't leaving empty-handed. The morning after Christmas, I sat alone at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee turning cold between my hands. The house felt different, quieter, like it was holding its breath. I looked around at all the familiar objects, the family photos on the fridge, the potholders Emma had made me last year, still hanging by the oven, a crayon drawing of our family Jake gave me in October, where I stood off to the side, smaller than everyone else. I didn't notice that detail until now. It hit me all at once. This wasn't just about a bad joke on Christmas Eve. It was years of being edged out, years of slowly being made invisible. That card was only the final shove. Let me give you the full picture. My name is Myrtle Patterson. I live in Westport, Connecticut, one of those picture-perfect suburbs where everyone has matching shutters and Christmas lights, timed to music. I used to imagine growing old surrounded by love, baking cookies with my grandkids, telling stories, laughing over family dinners. But what I got instead was a front row seat to how convenience beats loyalty. My son David is 42. He works in corporate strategy at a mid-sized firm, nothing flashy. But he carries himself like a CEO in waiting. I put that ambition there, brick by brick. He doesn't realize it, but everything he owns rests on my shoulders. Zuri, his wife, is 38. Always polished, always perfect. She's a marketing executive with a talent for passive aggression and performative concern. She's the kind of person who gives you herbal tea after insulting you to your face. "You poor thing. That tremor must be exhausting," she once said while handing me a cup. "Maybe you should sit this dinner out, just to be safe." And I did. I sat out my own grandson's birthday meal, in my own son's house. They'd never say it out loud, but I saw the signs. Conversations would stop when I walked into the room. My name wasn't on the RSVP list for Emma's dance recital. They planned vacations, holidays, even dentist appointments without mentioning me. It was as if I was already gone. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. I shared it with them not for sympathy, but so they'd understand if I moved a little slower or spilled my tea. I thought they'd be concerned. They were relieved. Suddenly, every little slip became evidence. When I shook slightly and dribbled wine on the carpet, Zuri acted like I'd smashed a chandelier. "That was imported from Italy," she said, scrubbing it with enough force to tear the fibers. A few drops of Merlot turned into a crime scene. At first, I rationalized it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was too sensitive. But when Zuri's sister suggested a facility where I'd be with people who understand, I finally stopped making excuses for them. And David, he just sat there, nodding like she was reading from a brochure. "Mom, it's just a suggestion," he said. "We just worry about you. You left the stove on last week." I hadn't. The pilot light had gone out on its own. But I realized then, they were already writing the script. And it ended with me locked away in someone else's definition of safe. What they didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that I had been keeping a secret. Several. In fact, after my husband Harold passed 3 years ago, I discovered something shocking. He'd been saving quietly. A life insurance policy I never knew about. A small coin collection with real value. Conservative investments that had matured. When I added it all up, along with my pension, the house I owned outright, and a little luck with the markets, I wasn't just surviving. I was financially independent. More than that, I was funding their lives. They thought they paid for Emma's private school. They thought their vacation cabin in Vermont was fully covered. They thought their mortgage was automated through David's account. But I was the one pulling the strings. Each month, I let David feel in control. Let Zuri think they were thriving. In reality, I was quietly covering the gap every single time they just barely made it. It wasn't about power. Not at first. It was about protecting the family I loved. Helping without asking for thanks. Making sure my grandchildren had everything, even if I got nothing in return. But now I saw it for what it was. They didn't just forget who I was. They rewrote me into a role that suited them better helpless. Fragile, disposable. And that's when I made a decision. If they wanted me gone, they would get their wish, but they wouldn't like what came with it. In the next few days, I began laying the groundwork. No announcements, no drama, just quiet phone calls, legal updates, one financial domino after another. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was reclaiming my place. And if you think the Christmas card was cruel, just wait until you see what I left behind. Want to hear how I turned their perfect world inside out? The week after Christmas, I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I planned. Most people think power means shouting the loudest or slamming doors. But true power, real, untouchable power moves in silence. It signs paperwork. It opens new bank accounts. It updates wills and reassigns beneficiaries. That's exactly what I did. The first step, I called James Morrison, our longtime family lawyer. Harold and I had used him for decades. He was in his 70s, now retired. Almost, but he still picked up the phone when I called. He remembered Harold fondly, and he always treated me with respect. I need to update my estate plan, I told him. When we met in person, I told him the rest. Not everything I couldn't bring myself to mention the card. But I told him how David and Zuri had begun talking about facilities, how they'd been pushing for decisions behind my back. Are you sure you want to do this? Myrtle, James asked gently. Absolutely. I'm not asking for drama, just security. On my terms. He nodded and got to work. Within days, we had a new will, a living trust, emergency medical directives, everything legal, everything airtight. Next, I went to the bank. The manager, Linda Chen, had known me for over 15 years. She looked surprised when I asked to open a separate account and transfer a large portion of my assets. Mrs. Patterson, if you don't mind me asking, is everything okay at home? Everything is exactly as it should be, I replied. And I meant it. Back home, I began to disappear in layers. I stopped answering David's calls, stopped showing up for Zuri's Sunday brunches, which always felt more like press conferences than family gatherings. Emma and Jake texted once or twice, but I knew Zuri monitored their phones. I could already feel myself being written out, but the more they erased me, the more control I reclaimed. 3 days later, David left a voicemail. His voice was cheerful. Too cheerful. Hey. Mom, just wanted to check in. Zuri's been researching some really great places, very modern. You'd love the staff. Just no pressure. Okay. No pressure. As if I hadn't been feeling the squeeze for months. As if every concerned conversation hadn't been building toward this. They weren't worried about me. They were pre-planning my quiet relocation so I wouldn't interfere with their lives, or worse, embarrass them at Emma's next piano recital. I took a deep breath and opened a Word document. If they wanted a clean exit, I'd give them one, but it wouldn't be the one they expected. I wrote a letter, then rewrote it. Then rewrote it again. Not angry, not vengeful, just honest. I explained everything. Why I was leaving, where the money had come from, what I had been paying for, how they had treated me subtly, consistently, and completely as a burden. I left out the poem. That was mine to carry. On December 29th, I packed 2 suitcases. That's it. Just the essentials. Passport, medication, documents, photos of Emma and Jake. A copy of the new trust James helped me establish one that ensured the kids' education would be covered. But only for them, not their parents. The house, I didn't sell it. I left it exactly as it was fully paid off, with the heat on low, and a note on the table beside the letter. I even left Harold's reading glasses on the nightstand. They'd been there for 3 years. Somehow it felt right that they stayed. That morning, I called a cab. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, waved from her garden as I left. She didn't ask questions. She just gave me a knowing nod. Funny, isn't it? The woman next door, the one who brings you soup in the winter, that's who notices your pain. Not your own children. The airport was quiet. The flight to Lisbon was long, but peaceful. I chose Portugal for a reason. Good health care, warm weather, and a growing community of American retirees looking for peace. I wasn't looking for a new life. I just wanted a place to breathe, a place where no one looked at my hands and saw failure, where no one waited for me to fall so they could say, "We told you she couldn't live alone." As the plane lifted off the runway, I looked out the window and felt something I hadn't in years. Not sadness, not guilt, but relief. Back in Westport, my son walked into my house and found the letter, the folder with their insurance policy, the tuition papers, the mortgage documents, all of it. And then his phone started ringing. The mortgage company, Emma's school, their insurance provider, all asking the same question to Sedzer. Why have payments stopped? Transition to part 4. By the time I landed in Lisbon, I had 53 missed calls and a text from David that said, "Mom, what did you do?" But he already knew. What they didn't understand yet was that I had planned every second of this. They were about to find out what happens when the woman you called a burden turns out to be the reason your entire life was possible. By the time I arrived in Lisbon, their world had already started to crumble. The first voicemail came in at 2:17 p.m. Eastern Time. David's voice, strained and shaky. "Mom, I'm at your house." "What's going on?" "What do you mean, starting a new chapter? Please call me. We need to talk." The rest came in a wave. Messages, calls, emails. Some frantic, some furious, some pretending to be concerned, others too angry to hide the truth. Zuri even sent a text that made me pause. "Myrtle, please. This isn't you. You don't just leave. We can fix this." "Fix what?" "Exactly." From the moment I stepped off that plane, I knew there was no going back. Not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. The taxi driver, a kind woman named Sophia, helped me with my bags. She chatted with me in slow, careful English as we wound through Lisbon's cobblestone streets. Her warmth reminded me of something I hadn't felt in years. Simple kindness. No agenda. No performance. Just genuine care. My apartment was small, but filled with sunlight. It had a little balcony that overlooked a quiet square where elderly men played chess in the afternoons and children kicked soccer balls in the evenings. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. And then, something unexpected happened. My Parkinson's symptoms started improving. Dr. Oliveira, my new neurologist, said stress can worsen tremors. And I believed her. Because in that quiet little apartment, with no one watching my every move like I was about to break something, I finally exhaled. I started walking more, eating better, sleeping through the night. I stopped shaking so much, not because the disease had disappeared, but because the constant judgment had, "But let's go back." Because while I was getting stronger, they were unraveling. David had opened the letter. Inside, I'd written, "By the time you read this, I will be gone." Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I told them I had arranged for my own care, my own housing, and my own future. That the home they lived in, the schools their children attended, the insurance that kept them covered, that had all been paid for by me. I explained, without cruelty, that I would no longer fund a life where I was mocked, dismissed, or tolerated out of obligation. And just in case they tried to twist my words, I had included documentation, bank statements, tuition receipts, insurance policies, 3 years' worth of quiet sacrifices made visible, in black and white. I knew David wouldn't believe it at first. He always thought of me as the supportive, behind-the-scenes kind of mom, the one who showed up, smiled, and said yes to everything. The one who helped without keeping score. And that's exactly how I wanted it, until the moment they decided to push me out of the frame completely. What they didn't realize was that I had always kept records. Not for revenge, but for clarity. Because clarity, I've learned, is the best closure. They tried to call James Morrison next. David demanded to know where I was. Zuri claimed I had mental lapses and might not be making sound decisions. James shut them down politely but firmly. Myrtle is fully competent. She planned this on her own. You'll need to respect her wishes. And that's when I got the message that chilled me. We've hired someone to help us find you. We're worried about your safety. Translation: we're scared we can't reach the money. They didn't want me back. They wanted their benefactor returned to the corner of the room where she belonged. Quiet, shaking, and grateful. I had already anticipated this. That's why James and I had put protections in place. The trust I created for Emma and Jake. Ironclad. It would fund their education, but not 1 cent could be touched by their parents. The mortgage, tuition, insurance payments, all canceled. As of that day, the faucet was turned off. I didn't do it to punish them. I did it because they had built their lives on the false belief that I was theirs to use indefinitely. And yet, I still left the door cracked. Just a little. I wrote, I will maintain contact with Emma and Jane Dye. They are my heart. But from this day forward, all communication with me will go through my lawyer. I knew what that meant to David. It meant he no longer had access to me. Not emotionally. Not financially, not legally. And for someone like him, that was worse than a slammed door. It was silence. And silence has a way of echoing louder than any argument. Meanwhile, in Lisbon, I was building a new life. I spent afternoons at a local cafe helping a sweet little girl named Anna with her English homework. I met her grandmother, Maria, who reminded me of the kind of friend I hadn't had in years. The locals started calling me Ao Americana, the American grandmother. And for the first time in a long while, I felt useful without being used. Transition to part 5. But back in Connecticut, things weren't going so well. Mortgage payments bounced. Insurance coverage vanished. Private school tuition failed to process. And panic began to bloom. They still thought they could fix it. That if they said the right thing, or made enough noise, I'd come running back. But I was done running. Back in Connecticut, David and Zuri were scrambling. On the outside, they were still trying to look composed. But on the inside, they were unraveling fast. Zuri was the first to call the mortgage company. She wanted to confirm the automatic payments. The representative politely informed her that the payments had, in fact, always come from an account under the name Myrtle Patterson. Zuri didn't believe it. She argued. She asked for a supervisor, but it was all there. 3 years of payments, all tied to my name. And now, the account had been closed. Their next payment, due in 3 weeks, would need to come from them. David checked his payroll account. He had always assumed health insurance was deducted from his paycheck. But as he looked closer, he saw something odd. The deduction line was labeled insurance, $0. 00. That's when it hit him. I had been paying their entire family's health insurance plan. Dental, vision, specialists, everything. He pulled up the past 3 years of statements and realized what he had missed. Every time he paid something, it had quietly bounced back. refunded from my separate account. The illusion of control he'd clung to for so long, gone. He called James Morrison again. "Can she really cut everything off like this?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. James answered calmly. "She didn't cut you off. She just stopped funding a life where she wasn't respected." Zuri, meanwhile, was calling Emma's school. The tuition bill had defaulted. The administrator explained that Grandma Patterson had been listed as the primary payer since Emma enrolled. Now that the payment method was invalid, they'd need immediate action, or Emma would be withdrawn. Zuri broke down crying, not out of guilt, but out of panic. They sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, mortgage statements, insurance plans, school invoices, utility bills, credit card balances. It was like watching someone slowly realize their house was built on sand. Their dream life, the one they posted about online, the one they showed off to neighbors, was funded, not earned. Funded by a woman they tried to shove aside. The final straw came when James delivered one more piece of information. The down payment on their house, their pride and joy, their accomplishment, had come from me. $80. 000. Wired in 2018. I had insisted on contributing, and they'd spun it as a small gift. But without it, they wouldn't have qualified for the loan. They wouldn't even be living in that house. They'd be renting, or worse still, in that apartment they hated so much. David sat in silence as the number sank in. Zuri whispered, "We wanted to put her in a nursing home, and she was paying for our entire life." And then came the confrontation. They didn't come to Portugal. Not yet. But they sent someone, a private investigator named Ryan Walsh. He found me at the little cafe where I helped Anna with her homework every Tuesday and Thursday. He was polite, professional, a little uncomfortable. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "I've been hired by your son. He's worried about you." I sipped my coffee slowly. I'm exactly where I choose to be, I told him. He looked down at his notes. "They're saying you may not be well enough to make decisions." I laughed. Not cruelly, just with a deep, quiet knowing. "Walsh, for the first time in years, I am perfectly clear. Still, I allowed one final call. Not out of obligation, but closure." Ryan put David on speaker. His voice was tight with emotion, swinging between anger and fear. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? You don't know these people. You don't even speak Portuguese." "I'm learning," I said calmly. "This is insane. You can't just run away from your family." "I didn't run," I said. "I walked. 'Cause I wasn't welcome in your version of family anymore." Then Zuri jumped in, her voice shaking. "Myrtle, please. We're sorry. We went too far. We didn't mean to hurt you." I believed she meant it, but not for the right reasons. She was sorry because the consequences arrived, not because of the card, not because of the things she'd whispered behind my back. She was sorry they'd been found out. Then David said it. "I'm filing for guardianship. If you're mentally incompetent, you can't make these decisions." And just like that, he made my decision easier. "David," I said, voice low and steady, "if you try that, I'll do two things. First, I'll cut every penny permanently. Everything gone. I'll sue to reclaim all the payments I made, because if I'm incompetent now, then I must have been incompetent when I gave you that money. Two, is that what you want?" Silence. He hadn't thought it through. He never did. They always assumed I'd be too tired, too fragile, too desperate for their approval to stand up for myself. And so I made it official, amending all financial support. The mortgage, the insurance, the tuition, everything, effective immediately. Ryan Walsh, to his credit, nodded in solemn agreement. He saw what they hadn't. This wasn't a woman in crisis. This was a woman who had simply run out of patience. The only exception I made was the trust for Emma and Jake. That stays. Untouchable. Locked until they turn 18. Because they're not to blame. They're still kids. And deep down, they loved me even if they were too young to understand what was happening around them. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Emma, written in pencil, full of spelling errors and honesty. I don't understand why you left, but I still love you. I hope you're happy. Jake says hi. It broke my heart and healed it at the same time. I knew then that I had done the right thing. And back in Connecticut, David and Zuri, they were finally learning how much it costs to lose someone they never truly appreciated. By the time my financial support officially stopped, winter had settled into Connecticut. Snow blanketed the quiet streets of Westport, covering the front yards and wreaths in a peaceful, deceptive calm. Inside David and Zuri's house, though everything was falling apart, the mortgage company called again, this time with urgency. They explained the obvious. If February's payment didn't come in by the 1st, late fees would apply. If it didn't arrive by the 15th, default proceedings would begin. Zuri panicked. She'd already maxed out one credit card trying to cover the kids' school tuition, which bounced 2 days after my final call. David tried to get a loan extension, but without my backing and with their current debt-to-income ratio, the bank said no. For the first time in their adult lives, they were on their own and unprepared for it. The life they built had looked perfect from the outside. Instagram-worthy vacations, matching family outfits on Christmas morning, organic snacks, designer strollers, weekend trips to Vermont. But none of it was sustainable. Not without me. Without my quiet monthly transfers and hidden payments. The truth came crashing through like a storm through glass. David stopped sleeping. He sat at the kitchen table late into the night, staring at printouts from the bank, trying to piece together where the money had gone and how they never noticed where it came from. He hadn't wanted to see it. That's the thing. He'd let Zuri manage the image while I kept the foundation steady. And now, the cracks were everywhere. Zuri, once the picture of composure, was unraveling. She stopped going to her yoga classes, skipped her Zoom meetings. She was busy calling insurance providers, schools, mortgage officers, financial advisors, anyone who might offer a lifeline. But the truth was simple. I had carried them longer than they realized. And when I stepped away, the weight fell. Then came the letter from Emma. I received it 2 weeks after I cut ties, folded neatly, addressed in a child's handwriting, and full of raw honesty. Dear Grandma Myrtle, Daddy says we have to move. Mommy cries a lot. I don't know why, but I miss you. Jake misses your cookies. Are you mad at us? Please don't be. Love, Emma. P.S. I still wear the sweater you made me. I sat with that letter in my lap for nearly an hour. She didn't understand the layers yet. She only knew she had lost someone who loved her unconditionally. And I wasn't mad at her. Not one bit. That's why I created the Education Trust. It would activate when she turned 18, college, trade school, whatever she wanted. Jake, too. Their parents wouldn't be able to touch a single cent. They deserve freedom, just like I did. Meanwhile, back in Lisbon, I was changing, not in dramatic ways, but subtle, meaningful ones. My routine had become sacred. Morning walks through the hills of Alfama. Fresh bread from the bakery downstairs. Afternoons helping Anna and the cafe kids with their English and math. I wasn't a sick grandma here. I wasn't a burden. I was just Myrtle, or Ao Americana, as the locals called me. A woman who showed up with warmth and patience and time to give. I found something I hadn't realized I was missing for years. Purpose without pressure. Then came one final ripple. James Morrison emailed me a few weeks later. David and Zuri had tried again, this time through a lawyer. A gentle request, framed as a desire to reconnect, rebuild. James asked how I'd like to proceed. I thought about it, long and hard, and I wrote back just one sentence. Let the silence speak for me. Because sometimes silence says what words can't. Silence says, I see what you did. I've moved on. I don't need to argue anymore. Because I've already won. And in that silence, David and Zuri finally had to face something they'd avoided for years. Accountability. That spring, they sold the house. The Vermont cabin was next. Emma was transferred to public school. Zuri took a remote consulting job. And David started commuting into the city again. Their lifestyle shrank. But maybe, in that shrinkage, they learned something. Maybe not. That part of the story no longer belonged to me. As for me, I began writing again. Not letters to them, but stories, essays, even short poems. Some about my childhood, some about Harold, some just little moments like the way Anna's face lights up when she solves a math problem on her own. Each word felt like another stitch in the quilt of my new life. Each page a reminder. I hadn't just walked away. I had chosen myself. There's one final part of this story left to share. It's not about revenge. It's about reflection. 'Cause even when you win, you don't walk away without scars. And even when they realize what they lost, it doesn't mean you forget what it took to finally be seen. 6 months have passed since I left everything behind. I no longer count the days since Christmas. I no longer check my phone for voicemails I know won't come. And I've stopped wondering whether David or Zuri finally understand what they lost. Because I've learned something simple and powerful. Not every story ends with reconciliation. Some end with clarity. Lisbon has become more than a place. It's become a rhythm. I wake to the sounds of trams passing below my apartment. The air smells like fresh bread and sea salt. Children run through the square before school. And elderly men play cards beneath shady trees. It's not quiet because it's empty. It's quiet because it's peaceful. That's a different kind of silence. Not the kind forced on you by people who stop listening, but the kind you choose. When you finally hear yourself clearly, my health is stable. Some days are better than others. Of course, the tremors come and go, but they no longer define my mornings. Stress used to cling to me like a second skin. Now it's just a passing breeze. I still take my medication, still keep my doctor's appointments, but I do it here, in a country where I don't feel like I have to apologize for my body. The truth is, Parkinson's didn't scare me nearly as much as the idea of being slowly erased by people who once claimed to love me. The cafe where I help Anna and the other children with their schoolwork has become my haven. Anna brought me a drawing, me standing in the middle of a circle of children, all smiling, all holding little American flags. She called it Our Grandma Myrtle. I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. They don't see me as sick. They don't see me as fragile. They just see me as someone who shows up, who loves without conditions. And that's what I always wanted to be. A few days ago, I sat down to write in my journal something I hadn't done since Harold passed. On the first page, I wrote, I was never the problem. I was just tired of being treated like one. I let that sentence breathe. I read it again, and I felt the last piece of guilt fall off my shoulders. There are still moments when memories come back unexpectedly, like when I pass a little boy who reminds me of Jake, or when I hear a piano and think of Emma's recitals. I miss them. Of course I do. I love them deeply. And that's the hardest truth to carry. You can miss someone and still know you had to leave. Love doesn't mean staying where you're disrespected. Love doesn't mean accepting less than kindness. And love, when it's real, never asks you to disappear quietly. Every so often, I receive letters from Emma. Short, honest, beautiful. She tells me about her new school, about her new room, about how Jake wants a puppy. And she always ends with, "I hope you're happy. We love you." I write back. Every time. I never say a bad word about her parents. I just tell her stories. About Portugal. About the bakery. About Anna and the cafe. I want her to know that even when adults mess up, love can still survive. That forgiveness can be slow. But it doesn't have to be loud. David and Zuri haven't contacted me since that final call. No more lawyers. No more pleas. I suspect their pride couldn't bear the silence that followed their threats. But deep down, I think they know it wasn't about the money. It was about the line they crossed, and the moment I stopped stepping back. They'll probably tell themselves a different version of what happened. One that paints me as cold, or impulsive, or unwell. Let them. Their story doesn't change my truth. So, what have I learned? I've learned that boundaries are not cruel. That walking away from people who diminish you is not betrayal, it's self-preservation. That money can be replaced, but dignity cannot. And that sometimes, the most radical thing an aging woman can do is refuse to fade quietly. If you're still listening, thank you. Thank you for walking through this with me. Maybe you're someone who's been treated like you're too much, or not enough. Maybe you've bent over backwards for a family that never bent for you. Maybe you've stayed too long at tables where your worth was measured in what you could give, not who you are. If that's you, let me tell you something. I wish someone had told me sooner. You are allowed to choose peace over proximity. You are allowed to choose freedom over familiarity. And most importantly, you are allowed to choose yourself.